Welcome back to More Than Gardening. I am canning up my chili today. I'm going to take you along with me. This is going to be my first video on the channel of pressure canning, so I'm going to do a little bit more of a step-by-step in-depth how to pressure can as well. So if you're new to pressure canning or you're really nervous about pressure canning, this video hopefully calms your nerves and gives you everything you need to know about how to pressure can. Now, chili needs to be pressure canned because there's meat in it. For my chili recipe, I'm gonna be using venison. This was a deer that one of my husband and I's friends got, and it's mixed with a little pork at the processor for a little bit more fat. But because there's meat in it, it makes it not acidic enough to water bath can. So little canning 101, water bath canning is for acidic food like your salsas, jams, applesauce, tomato sauce, things like that. Anything that's not acidic, like meat, stocks, potatoes, carrots, those all get pressure canned. So that's why the chili is gonna get pressure canned today. Also going in my chili, I'm using up red and yellow onion that I grew in my garden this year, along with some garlic from the store. I've not successfully grown garlic yet, and that's okay. And in here, I have a ton of peppers already prepped. You can see they look kind of funky because they're from the freezer. I harvested all these peppers this summer and then just diced them up and put them in the freezer. That way I can use them now to make my chili and then also in soup, stew, stir fries, things throughout the year. So the full recipe for my chili will be in the description of this video, but a high level, some sort of ground meat. I'm using venison. Beef works the exact same way, same recipe, same canning process. Onions, garlic, and I like to do a mix of every color of bell pepper, poblanos, and some spicy pepper. Today I'm using serranos. Also going in my chili, I canned up some tomato sauce a few weeks ago and I'm already using it. Got some frozen tomatoes in the freezer out in the garage that I probably could be using instead of store-bought diced tomatoes, but I'm trying to save those for barbecue sauce this year, so diced tomatoes are gonna be good enough. And then I like just a red kidney bean in my chili. You could also add pinto beans for a little more flavor, but we like red kidney beans, so that's all I'm using. In addition to these ingredients, there'll be a lot of spices, which I'll show as we get to that point, and again, they'll be in the description. Before I start getting my chili made in this giant stock pot, I'm gonna prep my pressure canner. Now, the biggest difference between water bath canning and pressure canning is water bath canning, you're submerging all of the jars underwater, where pressure canning, you're putting just a little bit of water. In my case, for this pressure canner, which is a Presto, and I'll link it in the description, you only need 3 quarts of water, and that 3 quarts of water is gonna get boiled and then create steam. The steam gets trapped in the pressure canner, causing the pressure to build, which is the heat source for the canning. So I need to get 3 quarts of water in my canner. There's also a line in the canner that shows me exactly where to fill to, so it makes it really easy and really user-friendly. And that's right up to the fill line and 3 quarts. Now, when you're pressure canning, another difference with water bath canning is you don't have to boil your jars prior to filling them. You don't really need to sterilize the jars because it gets so hot in the pressure canner for so long that does the sterilizing for you. So once I get water in the canner, I like to just put my jars in and I'll get the heat going and that'll just start heating the jars up. That way, once my hot chili is ready to be filled in the jars are nice and warm too, because you don't want differences in temperature while you're canning, like your contents of your jar. So in this case, your chili, your jars and your canning vessel all need to be relatively the same temperature. They either all need to be cold or they all need to be hot. So because I'm filling hot chili, I need hot or warm jars, which is why they're gonna heat up in the canner, and I need a hot canner to load them in. Now I have this first layer of 9 jars in the pressure canner, and you can see at the bottom here, there's a rack. This sits at the bottom of the pressure canner. That way the jars aren't in direct contact with the bottom of the canner, because it could get too hot in there and the jars could crack. So you just want some sort of barrier or something in between the jars and the bottom of the canner. Now I have this extra rack because I wanna can a double canner load. So I'm just gonna set those on top because I can fit 9 on the bottom. And then I'm gonna load up another 9 jars right on top of that rack. And I will link this rack in the description of this video. This rack is amazing and cuts my canning time in half because I can can double the amount of pint jars. I have 9 more jars on the top layer. I'm just gonna put the lid on with it cracked just so it can help hold the heat a little bit and start warming this canner up. And I'm gonna get the heat on at like medium and just start heating this whole thing up. While the jars are heating up, I can actually finally get started on my chili. I'm using a 21.5 quart stock pot. This is actually my water bag canner, but I use it for all sorts of big canning projects. And I'm just gonna start by getting a little bit of extra virgin olive oil in the pot while it's heating up. I'm gonna go in first with my onions and my garlic. Ooh. Mix this up a little bit. A little salt. A little pepper. Once the garlic is a little fragrant and the onions have cooked a little bit, I'm gonna add all my peppers in. I like to add just a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper at each step. Once my peppers and my onions are cooked about like halfway through, because they're gonna cook, all these ingredients are gonna cook in the canner too, so you don't need them to be 100% cooked through. But all I'm doing now is I'm actually taking them out, and I'm doing this that way I have room in my pot at the bottom specifically to put my venison in, because I want the venison to char and blacken a little bit on the bottom of this pan, or on the bottom of this pot. And I can't do it if all of my onions and peppers are in here. Now, you could do the meat, or I could do the venison in another pan and then mix it in, but I don't really want to get another pan dirty. So this is what I'm doing. This is really hot. I'm gonna add my venison. Ooh. Just gonna mush it all up. I'm gonna get it spread out on the bottom so that most of it is touching the bottom of this pot. While that's browning, I'm gonna do a little salt, a little bit of pepper. That underside should have a good crust now, so I'm just gonna break it up and mash it up. Once it's minced up and cooked like halfway through, I'm adding all of those cooked peppers, onions, and garlic back into my pot. You're gonna add all of your seasonings. I do salt, pepper, garlic powder, cayenne, chili powder, and cumin, and I will add all of that to the description. I just stir everything until it's all evenly distributed. And I like to do my seasonings before I add my sauce and my beans, because I think it just coats all of the meat and the peppers and the onions a little better, and you just get more flavor that way. I'm gonna show you, and this is what it looks like. You can see it's super, super brown because there's so much seasoning in there. And that is what makes this chili so good. All right, next I'm just gonna lower the heat to as low as it goes, because I don't want it to cook that much more right now. And I wanna start mixing my beans, my diced tomatoes, and my tomato sauce. I do 1 can or 15.5 ounces of beans per pound of meat. So this recipe I'm doing is 5 pounds of venison. So I have 5 cans of beans, and then I use that same amount for the sauce and the diced tomatoes. So I also have 5 cans of diced tomatoes and 5 cans of tomato sauce. Rinse your beans. You don't want all of that like bean juice, I guess it would be called, in your chili. It's not very good. All right, beans going in. Need to open all of my tomato sauces. I also need 2.5 cups of water in here. So I like to actually take these jars that have the leftover tomato sauce in them, and I use these to measure 2.5, because that way I get a little bit of that leftover sauce too. So I'm gonna fill these with water. So this is about 2.5 cups of water going in. Last, I'm going in with 5 cans of these diced tomatoes, and you don't want to strain these. You want to use the diced tomatoes with their juice. And you could also use fresh tomatoes here. Now I like to use a mix of sizes. I think it just keeps things kind of fun. So these are the petite diced, and then I also have the regular size dice, but you can do whatever you want here. And then once all my ingredients are mixed in, I am just gonna stir this all up so that it's well combined and let it simmer or let it come up to a boil, and it's gonna simmer for about 10 minutes. And then I'll start loading my jars. I'm gonna show you guys what this looks like. Look how good that looks. Oh my goodness, I wish you could smell it. Chili has been simmering for 10 minutes. I'm gonna turn the heat down a little bit and just take this top off carefully here. And I can start taking my jars out of the canner and filling them. Now, since the jars have been in here for a while, they are warm. So I'm gonna use these tongs, and then I'm putting them on a towel on my countertop because the jars are warm, the countertop is cold. You don't want hot jars going on a cold counter. The difference in heat could cause the glass to crack. Some of the water evaporated out and it's not at that fill line again, so I'm just gonna add a little bit more water to bring it back up to that 3-quart line. And then also, I'm gonna add a little splash of white vinegar. This is going to keep the jars clean because I have hard water. Finally, it's time to fill jars. So I'm going to mix this up. And it smells so good. Oh my goodness. Grab my funnel, just start filling jars. And if you're gonna make this chili just for dinner, or I guess if you're just gonna make this and not can it for long term, I do recommend letting it simmer for at least an hour. That lets the flavors all really marry together. It just gives the chili like a really good depth of flavor. That I'm gonna get that same depth of flavor through the canning process because they're gonna be in the canner for 75 minutes and then they're gonna sit on my shelf for however long until we finish these. Knowing my household and my husband, they're not gonna last very long. We eat this all the time. We use chili as almost like a form of meal prep. Like if we don't feel like making dinner or lunches on the weekends, or even during the work week, we just grab a jar of chili from the basement and eat it plain or put it over some rice. So it's probably isn't gonna last that long, but regardless, that processing time in the canner and then the time that it's gonna sit on the shelf, the flavors are gonna all come together. So that's why I don't simmer this for much longer than 10 minutes. And then each jar is getting filled to a 1-inch headspace. And I know pretty well by this point where an inch is, so I'm filling it to about that, and then once they're all filled, I'll actually come through and measure and adjust. All the jars are filled, and I have, see if you can see this, a good amount still left in my pot, which is perfect because we're gonna have this for dinner tonight. So I'm just gonna turn that off and move it. And these are about at an inch of headspace, but I need to adjust a couple of them. First, I'm gonna get all of the air out. This is a debubbler or air removal tool. I'll link this in the description. But this just moves everything around to get any of that trapped air out. And while you go through and do this, you're gonna notice that the chili is going to drop and you're gonna get more headspace. So you're gonna wanna do this step before you go and adjust everything to that 1 inch. Now that the air's out, I'm just gonna go through here and like this one is over an inch. So move it to that one. This one's well over. Move it here. These all look pretty good to me. I got a headspace tool. Take this little tool and put it at the edge of your jar, and then depending on where the food comes up to, it's an inch. I hope you can read this. An inch, 3/4, a 1/2 inch, or a 1/4 inch. So I need an inch for chili, so I need to put it here, and then whoo, it's like perfect. Good there. Now that the headspace is good, I need to clean the rims of these jars because they are so dirty and full of chili. So I just use white vinegar. You could use water. I think vinegar does a lot better of a job just cutting through like this sauce, and the fact that we're canning meat and there's like a little bit of a greasy aspect to it, I think that vinegar just does a lot better of a jar. You don't want anything on the rims of these jars, because if there is and it comes in between the jar and the lid that we're gonna put on, you have a chance of the jars probably not sealing, and you really don't want to go through all this work of canning to have a jar not seal. My rims are clean. I'm gonna put my lids on now. You want to use new lids. Some people say you can reuse lids. I don't like to. I don't think it's worth it. And then I just put on the rings fingertip tight, just like that. And then that is fingertip tight, just until it stops naturally, and then just a touch more. So that one went sideways. Ooh. Like that. At this point, they're ready to go in my pressure canner. And I have had the pressure canner still warm this entire time, so warm jars going into warm water. So this is how it looks in here with the first 9. And then I'm gonna go ahead and grab my rack, and it's just gonna go right on top. And this allows me to put another 9 jars on top of it. All the jars are in. Now I'm gonna put the top on. Now, this is where it gets like really important to follow the pressure canning rules. So I'm gonna set you here so I can show you. This is the lid. And every time before you pressure can, you need to make sure that a few things are happening. One, this is like, I think this is called your gasket or your seal. You need to make sure that this is in your canner. You also need to make sure that this vent right here, you need to make sure that this isn't like clogged with anything. So I just hold it up to the light and look through. And as long as I can see through it, which I'm struggling. Okay, there. As long as you can see through it, then you know you're good. That's where your steam is gonna vent out. You need that vent. If you don't, none of the pressure will be able to escape the canner, and then it can like explode. So you need to make sure that that has a clear line of sight of vision. You need to see air through this vent. This guy right here needs to be able to freely move up and down. This also, this is like your little sign to know that pressure is building in the canner, which I'll show you once pressure starts building. But before you can, just make sure you can press it with your finger right here, and then it freely moves up and down and it doesn't get clogged. Another thing, this is your pressure gauge on top of your lid. This just needs to be tight and secured in here, and make sure you have it on, okay? Now, this is heating up and I'm ready to start canning. I'm ready to start building pressure. So I'm gonna put the lid on. Mine is really nice because it has, oh, one more thing. When I said this vent needs to be, you need to be able to see through it. This is my weight that I'm gonna put on eventually, which I'll get to, but don't have this vent, or don't have this weight on your vent right now. So you're gonna start with the weight off and you can just put your lid on. Mine, I'm gonna turn this, oh, it's heavy, a little bit, but I have a nice arrow on the top of my lid here. Then I've got an arrow over here, and I'll link this pressure canner in the description. It's super easy to use. You just line up the arrows and then make it tight. With the lid, I'm gonna let it sit. I'm gonna turn the heat up to high, and I'm just gonna wait until the vent starts throwing out some steam, and then I'll show you the next step. Once this vent starts steaming through at a steady rate, like you can see here, you're gonna start your timer for 10 minutes. It's been 10 minutes of this venting now, and also the air vent lock in the back is up, which is just another sign that pressure is starting to build in the canner. So now that it's been venting for 10 minutes, I'm gonna go ahead and put my weight on. And now that the weight is on, not as much of that steam can escape from the canner, and it's just gonna start building all that pressure inside, making it really, really hot to start processing and sterilizing our chili. And it's basically the whole canning process. So now that the vent is on, this pressure gauge is gonna start to creep up really slowly, and then chili is gonna process at 10 PSI. So I'm waiting until this gauge goes all the way up to 10. And then once it's at the 10, I'm gonna start adjusting my heat just so that it stays at the 10. Once you start pressure canning for a while, you'll realize how your stove acts, what heat level it needs to be at to stay at 10. You kind of have to play around with it for the first little bit to figure out what heat setting on your stove keeps it right at 10. Now, if you go over 10 by like a hair, sometimes I can like 11 or 12 pounds, it doesn't matter that much. Sometimes I like to actually play it on the safe side and get it to like 11. That way it doesn't creep under 10. If the pressure goes to below 10 at any time, you have to restart your time all over, which is so annoying. So you really want to make sure you keep it right at 10. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute once it starts creeping up. My gauge is slowly creeping up to this 10. So when it does that, I like to start lowering the heat just a little bit because I don't want it to fly past 10. And this is like right between medium and low. For me and my stove, that seems to be what works the best. But again, you'll just have to play with your heat levels and figure out what keeps it at a constant 10. But now I'm just gonna let it slowly creep up to 10 pounds. My pressure gauge just got up to 10, so I went ahead and started my timer. I'm doing 75 minutes because I have pints. If these were quarts in here, I would do 90 minutes. And the entire 75 minutes, this needs to stay right at 10. If it ever dips below 10 pounds of pressure, I have to restart my time. So I stay in the kitchen during the whole processing time, this whole 75 minutes. I like to take this time to just like clean up the big mess I've made and keep a good eye on my canner to make sure that I'm staying safe and staying at that 10 pounds. With that said, if you are at elevation higher than 1,000 feet, so I'm in Michigan, I'm under 1,000 feet, which is why I'm doing 10. If you're above 1,000 feet and you have a weighted gauge, you're gonna have to can at 15 pounds pressure. And then if you have a dial gauge, it's a little bit different. I don't have one of those canners, so I don't know exactly how that works or what the pressure should be, but I will link this book in the description of the video. It's the Ball Blue Book Guide to Preserving, and they have a whole section in here. They have an altitude chart. They have the weighted gauge and the dial gauge method for altitude to tell you exactly what pressure to can at based on your elevation and then the type of canner you have. But again, if you're under 1,000 feet, you're using the same Presto canner as me with a weighted gauge, you can just go to 10 and follow this exact process. Timer just went off. It's been 75 minutes. I just turned the heat totally off and I'm gonna wait until the pressure comes down to 0. Don't touch your canner when the timer goes off, just turn off the heat. My pressure is down to 0, but this is still up in the back, so I need to wait for that to come down too. All right, now it's down. I'm gonna remove the weight. And no steam is coming up. This is at 0. That in the back is down, so there's no pressure in the canner. I am gonna go ahead and take the lid off very, very carefully. And I'm just gonna twist. And there's a lot of steam in there, so you just wanna be careful. And I'm actually going to, I'm gonna use a towel just to protect my hand in case that steam is a little hot. And I like to just vent it a little bit to let some of that steam out. And then just move it a little. And I'm gonna let this sit like this, open, for 5 minutes. You don't want the jars in the canner to change temperature so quickly. It was in such a hot environment. You don't wanna just take the lid off and expose them to the cold too quick. You wanna gradually change the temperature inside the canner. So this is gonna just sit with that lid like popped open just a little bit for 5 minutes. 5 minutes have passed. I'm taking the lid totally off and set it over here. And I'm just gonna let these sit for another 5 minutes. I know it's like kind of a tedious process. It's like wait for the pressure to go down 5 minutes, prop it open, 5 minutes. But this is a really good way to make sure that your jars aren't changing temperatures so quickly and sealing and unsealing. And it's just the best way to get the best seals. And once this is off, you'll start to hear them seal because the jars are cooling down, the air is escaping, the lids are sealing to the jars. Once they've been sitting for 5 minutes, they're finally ready to come out of the canner. So I'm just gonna carefully unload them onto this towel. Just like when you're filling the jars, you want to have the jars on a towel rather than your countertop, because again, these jars are really hot and your countertop is cold and that temperature difference could cause the hot jars to crack. And you're gonna see that as they're coming out, they're dropping a little bit of what looks like chili, and that's because some of the outside of the jars were a little dirty going into the canner just from spilling while I was filling them. And I think I lost a little bit of the chili during the canning process through a little bit of siphoning, which is fine. I've never pressure canned anything without losing a little bit of the liquid in the jars out of the canner, so it's really not a big deal. I'm gonna use tongs to get this wrap out because, ooh, it's gonna be really hot. These ones are much dirtier because they were on the bottom and they were in that 3 quarts of water, but again, as long as they seal, they're fine. These are just gonna sit overnight. They have to sit for 12 to 24 hours while the lids seal, and that was one sealing just now, that little pop, that's a good thing. That's what you wanna hear. Now, don't touch them for the next 12 to 24 hours. Let them seal, let them sit, let them just chill out. Don't touch the tops, don't touch the jars are really hot, don't touch the rings, just leave them alone. Tomorrow morning, I'm gonna come through and remove all the rings because you don't need those. The lids will be sealed to the jars fully on their own. You don't need those rings anymore. I'm gonna wash my jars because they're a little dirty and just label the top of them chili November 24. And these are gonna be shelf stable as long as the seal is intact. So anytime that we wanna enjoy some chili, I'm just gonna pop the lid open and heat it up. And that is everything you need to know about how to can chili. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and follow me on Instagram at More Than Gardening. I will be posting more oh, that was another seal. I'll be posting more canning content and some baking and other videos soon. But if you want to see something specific, let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.